George Harrison, the so-called quiet Beatle whose calm demeanor, spiritual depth, and preference for peace over publicity often defined his public image, was not known for holding grudges. Yet there was one man in the music business he truly deeply disliked more than anyone else, and that man was Alan Klein, the controversial manager whose involvement with the Beatles in the late 1960s became a source of lasting bitterness. Harrison first met Klein during the band's most turbulent period, when tensions between John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and himself were already straining under the weight of creative differences, business disputes, and personal frustrations. Lennon and Harrison were initially swayed by Klein's charisma and bold promises to clean up the group's messy financial affairs, especially after the collapse of their Apple Corps venture had left the band's business side in chaos. McCartney, however, immediately distrusted Klein, refusing to sign with him, a decision that would later lead to open legal warfare among the four Beatles. At first, Harrison believed Klein could stabilize their situation, but it didn't take long for him to see a different side: a manipulative, controlling figure who thrived on pitting people against each other and prioritizing his own profit above the group's unity. Harrison grew convinced that Klein's interference had deepened the fractures between the band members, accelerating their breakup and souring relationships that were already fragile. The animosity intensified when Harrison found himself caught in legal tangles and lingering contractual disputes tied to Klein's management, issues that followed him well into his solo career. To George, the betrayal was personal as well as professional. Klein had not only failed to protect the spirit of the Beatles, he had, in Harrison's eyes, exploited it for his own gain. While Harrison was capable of forgiving personal slights, often turning to his spiritual beliefs to let go of anger, he struggled to pardon what he saw as a deliberate undermining of trust and artistic integrity. In interviews years later, when Klein's name came up, Harrison's tone would noticeably cool. There was no warmth, no nostalgic indulgence, only a quiet dismissal and the occasional cutting remark about those in the business who saw artists as nothing more than commodities. Friends of Harrison said his dislike for Klein wasn't rooted in a single explosive incident, but rather in a slow accumulation of disappointments, manipulations, and an unshakable sense that Klein embodied the worst instincts of the music industry. Even decades after the Beatles had disbanded, the resentment lingered, a rare and striking exception to Harrison's generally measured outlook. When Klein passed away in 2009, Harrison had already been gone for 8 years, but those close to him believed his opinion of the man would never have softened. In a life defined by the search for harmony, both musical and spiritual, Alan Klein remained, for George Harrison, the one figure who had done the most to disrupt it. For a man who valued trust, sincerity, and creative freedom above all, there could be no greater sin, and thus no one he disliked more.